Welcome to the Citadel of HYPE Podcast. We are well on our way now, right, Gemma? We got a few episodes out now.
Yeah, episode number 3. We are tanking on with these. I mean, we've barely scratched the surface of everything that we want to cover, and we're pretty much kind of going through our favourites at the moment, aren't we? But we are trying to kind of narrow things down a little because we realised we were being quite broad and sweeping, so we're trying to be a little bit more focused from now on. That's the idea. We'll see if we pull it off, shall we?
Today we're going to take a look at Norse mythology, and we actually had to trim this one down too because there's so many different events that happen. But for this episode, we're actually going to focus on Ragnarok and the binding of Fenrir, which we were both talking about and probably the most interested in of all the stories that is told within Ragnarok, right?
Absolutely. I mean, this one, as you all see, is absolutely fantastic. I mean, for anybody who's not familiar with this story, don't worry. We are going to kind of summarize as succinctly as possible, just so you can get an idea, especially within the context of the discussion of ice and fire. So, and I know Kyle's got a little summary for us so we can get to grips with this story.
Ragnarok is the Norse version of basically the apocalypse, and it happens, and the world is plagued by civil war. We see patricide, fire giants, ice giants, and a great winter known as Fimbulvinter that will end all life on Earth. So very similar to what's happening within Game of Thrones. We have a giant wall, we have the long night coming, we have the red god and the others and the old gods. So that kind of thing is going on. And I just want to go over the word Fimbulvinter, Gemma. It's really interesting in etymology. It says it comes from Old Norse, meaning awful great winter. The prefix Fimbul means great/big. So the correct interpretation of the word Fimbulvinter is the great winter. Don't you think that sounds kind of similar to the long night?
It sounds very similar to the long night.
Okay, so during Ragnarok, or people that interpret Ragnarok believe this is a story about birth, life, death, and rebirth, a lot of what we see within the Song of Ice and Fire as well. And it occurs in scales. So the cycle of seasons, of day and night, of the phases of the moon, of the life of any organism, the up and downs in lives, and the Ragnarok mass extinctions, or called the twilight or doom of the gods. So Gemma, my question to you is, isn't the same thing happening within Game of Thrones and the Song of Ice and Fire? Is Westeros undergoing its own version of the Ragnarok?
Well, it would seem so, wouldn't it? I mean, Melisandre would most definitely tell you that it was. In the context of the religion of R'hllor, it's almost a like for like. I mean, we've said many times over the past few weeks in these podcasts that George R. R. Martin does not do like for likes. But this one's really, really similar. I mean, we're talking about the god of darkness and ice, the god of fire and light, this huge clash. We have the long night or the great winter. Ragnarok itself is a tale of ice and fire, quite literally. It's an apocalyptic story, but like you said, Kyle, it's also a story of rebirth. There are fire giants and frost giants, but when they use in Norse mythology, the term giants doesn't necessarily mean giants. Perhaps George R. R. Martin's given us some literal giants as a nod to this, but in Norse mythology, they're not necessarily tall or huge. The word giant, it's not the physical size necessarily, more the symbolic stature of a person, as in they have a giant or significant personality. I don't think that everything in the Song of Ice and Fire is going to be a direct parallel to Ragnarok. We've said this, haven't we? I mean, there's so many other influences that George R. R. Martin has brought into this story, but I do think that it will follow Ragnarok significantly through certain events and characters, which we're going to come to in a little while. George R. R. Martin's clearly telling his own story, and he has deviated from Ragnarok, but we can't ignore that George R. R. Martin clearly knows this story very well and has used huge elements of it in his own. The Ragnarok acts as a clean slate for the gods and men to start anew. to rebuild and better themselves, and to essentially not repeat the same mistakes that they committed before Ragnarok. And I think we were talking about this last week, weren't we, Kyle, in our medieval, when we were looking forward to the future, and we pretty much came to almost that exact same conclusion in the Song of Ice and Fire, and that was kind of the lesson of the story of Ragnarok almost, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. There's this, the long night of the apocalypse is coming, and we can really see that within Westeros. We actually talked about this in both of our previous podcasts to do with, obviously the old gods and prophetic things, but also we talked about through human history how kind of this medieval time trap was going on, and a period of the Dark Age is what's going on with Westeros. So there's so many interesting characters, Gemma. We really had a hard time trying to not go over every single one of them in this podcast. I think we can
Yeah, the character parallels, is that what you're talking about between the Ragnarok and Ice and Fire?
Yeah.
It's insane. I mean, some of them are really obvious and some of them not so much. There's maybe a few candidates that could fall into that category. And what we can do with these parallels is draw potential conclusions to how the Ice and Fire story could likely end by comparing how similar the characters' journeys in Ragnarok are. So I'm going to start with Bran. Bran is by far the most obvious. Bran Stark is Fenrir. There's obviously a direwolf symbolism. Bran's chained or like bound because of his disability. So we've got Jaime Lannister is Tyr. Tyr's the Norse god that bound Fenrir, and Jaime essentially binds Bran in the series when he pushes him off the tower. Tyr also loses his sword hand, his right hand, after he binds Fenrir when Fenrir bites it off. Obviously, Jaime loses his sword hand after binding Bran, if that's, in that kind of parallel. Bran doesn't eat Jaime's hand in the Song of Ice and Fire, but Jaime did lose his hand as an indirect consequence of what he did to Bran, pushing him from the tower in the first instance. Fenrir's got a wolf brother named Gamir, who's wild and uncontrollable and unpredictable, and that harks back to Rickon. Mm-hmm. There's other Starks, there's Robb and Sansa as well, but I'm very interested in Loki, who could be Littlefinger, but I prefer Bloodraven for
I'm
Loki.
in agreement there too. The idea of being tricked into doing something for not understanding the reason why.
Exactly.
And I think
Loki's the trickster, isn't he? And a shapeshifter of sorts.
I think for the Song of Ice and Fire, and what you said, Gemma, earlier about Martin not doing one-for-ones, he splits everything up, and that's what he's so good at doing. Being able to make you look through multiple lenses to find almost the same conclusion, but you experience it differently. It's the journey you take, right? And I think, I'm going to talk about this in just a minute because it's something I'm probably going to go off about anyways when we continue our conversation. But I want to actually go back into the story of Fenrir and Tyr and all of these characters. So the Norse god Loki basically turns into an enemy of the gods, and he actually mates with Angerboda, and she's a frost giant, and she who bodes anguish. So that doesn't sound like a very, very nice god, right, Gemma? Angerboda.
No, not particularly. No, I've got more of these character parallels though. If you want me to carry on, because there's so many.
Now together they created essentially these end of the world monsters, if you will. The first serpent was Jormungandr, who is the serpent that encircles the world. We were actually going to cover this one. We believe that Daenerys' story really mirrors this one, but that was something we had to cut. The goddess of death, Hel, who is very much like Melisandre, to deal with the underworld.
That was one of my parallels. She's she's the queen of the dead, isn't she? But she's both half beautiful and half dead. She's the consort of the fire giant. I can't remember, Surtur, The fire.
Surtur, yeah.
The one, yeah. She's the consort of the fire giant, which is almost
Surtur, who is like
parallel.
Azor Ahype, right? Like almost like Azor Ahype.
Exactly. Or R'hllor.
Yes, very much. Actually, R'hllor is probably a better comparison.
The thing, there's so many situations where you could say, you could also say that Cersei falls into this category to an extent. There are other women in the show that you could. I've got Surtur is also named the Black, and he lives on the Bifrost, a huge giant ice wall that separates the world of giants from the world of gods, and wields a fiery sword. That could hark back to Jon Snow, but then we've got Heimdall,
yeah.
The Watcher. Again, the Watcher watches on the wall. That's Jon Snow again. I've got more. I've got loads more. Thor, the storm god, who.
Gemma, I better stop you there. Because we're gonna get to the story of Fenrir.
Go.
and the third god. Sorry, Gemma, you're making me laugh. The third god was the giant wolf Fenrir. Now, the gods had terrible forebodings about the destiny of these three beings, and they were right. Basically, they came to destroy the world. So, like I said, Jormungandr is the serpent that went to the ocean, circled the ocean and humankind, and Hel had been relegated to the underworld. However, Fenrir had been chained to the earth because he was going to grow so large in size that he would just release his power and basically destroy the planet. Now, he inspired a lot of fear in the people, and they chained him up and deceived him. Only, and this is my favorite part of the whole story, Tyr, the upholder of law and honor, dared to approach Fenrir and feed him. And you, Gemma, talked about this earlier, how this kind of mirrors Jaime Lannister. Even though we think he's an evil character, he stood mostly, except for trying to kill Bran, for good things.
Mostly, yeah.
Mostly, he's done a lot of bad things. But, okay, not one for ones, like we said, but there is a very, very big parallel. And basically, what we're trying to get at here is we think that Bran and Jaime's fates are actually going to be tied to the television show and the books as well.
I've got some more parallels. Can I just quickly, because there's so many here. I'll be really quick, I promise.
No, it's all good. It's all good. And Gemma has some more parallels.
I've got some more parallels. I've got Thor, the storm god, who wields a mighty warhammer. Who's that?
Well, I think that might be Robert Baratheon, Gemma.
It might well be, yeah.
Bobby B.
Okay, so we've got, I know we've already done Bloodraven with Loki, but Odin, a one-eyed god that has two ravens, that travels throughout the world as his eyes, who has one eye and hangs himself from a sacred tree in the pursuit of knowledge. Come on.
Yggdrasil, the tree of life, the weirwoods, the trees of life, literally.
Yeah, literally. There's the very image of Bloodraven. My question really is, if Bran is Fenrir, then he's the bad guy, right? Because that's essentially the story, isn't it? And that's where things get really, really interesting.
Well, here's the thing. And I think this is going to happen within Game of Thrones. And this kind of, it wasn't the real message of what was going on in Ragnarok because the world ended. But I think that we talked about rebirth earlier. That's going to be really important. And I think that what's going on is, even though we see them as the bad guys, per se, the White Walkers, they're actually inspiring change, believe it or not, because people have to get together to defeat them, right?
Yeah. Because Tyr, who we're paralleling with Jaime Lannister here, he's a god often represented with one hand, like we've said. But
and a fiery blade. And a fiery blade as well. Exactly.
He's essentially a war god. The Romans even assumed that Tyr was like the name for their own god of war, Mars. Now, and I will keep reiterating this point, I don't think George R. R. Martin has written this whole series as a reenactment of Ragnarok. He's been inspired by, goodness knows, historical events and battles, other works, The Call of Cthulhu, Lord of the Rings. That there are so many other influences within this text, but
Arthurian legend as well.
Exactly, but we are acknowledging those differences, but and there are differences with the Ragnarok story as well, but what we are focusing on for the purposes of this discussion are the similarities. And our goal, as always, is to look for clues towards the end game and perhaps the future even beyond that. So this gives us these little Easter eggs that we can pick up and pull to pieces and explore. So if we look at the tale of Fenrir, the theory goes that Jaime is Azor Ahai and Bran is the darkness that will be pushed back. So it could be like when we think of Jaime and Cersei, we think of the Valancourt prophecies. And so it could be that Azor Ahai and the Valancourt prophecy are kind of the same thing. Because he's already been tempered in water. That was his confession to Brienne in the battles of Harrenhal, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. Then later he confessed to Tyrion that Tysha wasn't really a whore. So that was the knife being driven into the heart of a lion. That was his second tempering, which means if this pattern follows, Jaime Lannister has to be the Valonqar that kills Cersei. Mm-hmm. He will play the role of Nissa Nissa, and this will be the final stage of Jaime's transformation.
I absolutely agree. So here's the thing. I've always thought that Jon Snow is the main Azor Ahai. He's going to be the main Azor Ahai for all intents and purposes in the show, people. He's going to fight the Night King one-on-one. There's only one person that's going to do that. That's Jon. However, if I were to pick another candidate to have made as large of a sacrifice as Jon, I think we're going to see Jaime actually do something of that magnitude. He did it before with the Mad King Aerys Targaryen. We've got to remember that. Him removing his sister and possibly dying for that, that's absolutely huge, right? Yeah. I mean, she's going to get to the point where it's probably going to get to the point, well, at least for the show, in my opinion, where they're going to have to fall back to King's Landing or something, because, I mean, the Night King has a dragon. His numbers are going to grow. But Jaime, what could we see Jaime doing? You know, something. I think he could blow up the Red Keep with all the wildfire that's left, maybe if they still have some, and blow up the Army of the Dead. Something of that magnitude, right? So,
yeah. Well, there's a lot.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, there's a lot of arguing about this whole Valonqar thing. But if we are following this particular story of Fenrir and Bran and Tyr and Jaime, Jaime has to kill Cersei, and I've always maintained it's that poetic irony. Jaime has to kill Cersei, and people have often said, well, if he's a Valonqar, he's only got one hand, how can he wrap his hands around? And I've literally been sat and I have Googled, is it possible to strangle a person with one hand? You know, if somebody looked at my search history, I've looked at blood spatter and different wounds for swords. I mean, I look like a complete psychopathic serial killer if somebody didn't know any better and was to look at my search history. But yes, the answer to that is you can strangle a person with one hand. I mean, we could have this big, huge, explosive kind of scenario, and perhaps the show will be more inclined to go that way. But actually, I think the act of Jaime killing Cersei would have to be something more personal and subtle and even somber, because if it happens in this big, glorious spectacle, I think we're kind of diminishing the impact of what he has to do. Cersei is a hateful character, but Jaime has loved her all of his life. This is a really big deal, and I think to really capture that moment, it has to be kind of stripped back, if that makes sense.
Gemma, should I drop some nuclear bomb level stuff on everyone right now? Can I? I'm gonna prove that Jaime is the Valonqar right now. Are you ready?
I know you've got something amazing, and I can't wait for you to get this one across. So shoot.
Okay, so George likes to hide things within the story. He likes to put in red herrings. We got to look to the actual names of Jaime's brother and father. Now, the word Tyr, we're like we said earlier, Tyr is Jaime, okay? But the etymology of the word Ion of Greek origin, so Tyrian, means the road to or the path to in ancient usage, making Tyrian the road to or the path to Tyr. Now, I got one more for you. The father Tywin. Win is Proto-Germanic origin and always has the meaning to gain by struggling. So, if we look at Jaime's story, obviously he released Tyrion. He had all of these problems with Tyrion. And then Tyrion killed his father, which was huge. That made a huge rift in their relationship. Him killing Cersei would be fulfilling the Valancourt prophecy, right? Like, I don't know. The path to... If George is trying to give a hint that Jaime is the god of war Tyr, I don't know. I don't think it could be any more clear than that. Tyrion and Tywin, it's literally hidden within their names.
Not even hidden. It's quite blatantly there. Yeah.
So,
yeah, a sneaky little Easter egg that we had to go delving deep into the myth of the story. It's right there. It's a point. These are point of view character names and the direct relations of these point of view character names. This is right there, smack bang in our face.
So the one thing I absolutely love about Jaime's story and why he's probably my second or third favorite character. You guys know I love Sandor because of his story, but Jon and Jaime are almost equal for me. And if we look at all the people that have entered the White Book, some of them have had failure, but people like Arthur Dayne, they had very illustrious campaigns. They were very, very, very highly respected. Now, I was talking about earlier to my friend, I was having a conversation before this podcast about how failure is just as important as the victory because of the lessons you learn. I think that's in relation to all of the problems Jaime has had to deal with. He can handle it. In the end, he'll be able to handle it, and that's what makes his story so unique. And I think that's why he will stand for the right things in the end of the story, really. Redemptive arc. He's gonna get in the White Book.
Absolutely. I mean,
sorry, let me correct that. He's already in the White Book, but it's going to say what he wants.
It'll have something impressive in there, something that he can look back on and be proud of, you mean?
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, what would be the point in seeing Jaime finish his story if he hasn't had these trials and tribulations that he's responded to and learned from? It's called character growth. If he started and ended, and if he started this wonderful, amazing person and ended this wonderful, amazing person, that would be really, really boring, to be honest. Nobody wants to read that. And George R. R. Martin knows far better than that. I've got a bit more etymology for you to add to what you were saying. And again, I will reiterate, this is if George R. R. Martin is indeed intending on adhering to the Ragnarok mythology. If that's the case, in my opinion, Jaime is the only possible candidate for Azor Ahai because he represents Tyr, the one-handed god, the war god, the champion of mankind. In his role as the mighty one, he's going to prevail over Fenrir. The name Tyr means god or glory, but in Hebrew, the meaning of the name Jaime is supplanter, somebody that replaces or supersedes. To take the place of a person or a thing in authority. Again, it's all there in the text, isn't it? All we need to do is just dig that tiny bit deeper, but not that much deeper, to be honest.
He took Mad King Aerys' life. He's going to take Cersei's life. It's right there.
Yeah.
Gemma, let me ask you this, because this is something that has been floating around in my head lately. Dan and Dave got told there was 3 more big events in the series, right? What were the 3? It was Hodor, Jon's resurrection.
Yep.
And then what is the third thing?
That's the question, isn't it? What's that WTF moment?
I think it's with Jaime.
Yeah, I agree.
I think, and it has to relate to Cersei being Nissa. That's going to be a huge, huge, huge moment in this story. Like one of the 5 biggest moments. Jaime has always been attached to Cersei. Like, they have defined the Lannisters other than Tywin. I mean, it's crazy, right? Like their
They were
relationship is
literally physically attached. He was holding on to her heel, wasn't he?
Yeah, and you know, they have this kind of Romeo and Juliet thing going on too. I think they're both going to die personally. I would love to. I mean, I don't know if I'd want to see Jaime be king, but I mean, I think he could help Jon or Daenerys even.
Well, I think this is where Jaime and Jon are going to be put at odds. And I think this is going to be where Jon Snow comes into this story. This is the choice that Jon Snow's going to have to make, because basically what it boils down to is this. We have Bran Stark, this sweet and innocent young boy, adventurous, climbs towers and walls. He wants to be a knight. And then he turns to this path of darkness. He's been corrupted by Bloodraven. And we don't know what their true motivations are. But, if we're going along with this Norse mythology, it's not good, let's face it. And of course, Bran, if he becomes a champion for the Great Other, as Melisandre has literally said he is, and then we've got Jaime, this arrogant, dishonorable, oath-breaking, incestuous. He was horrendous. Let's face it, when we first met Jaime Lannister, he was an absolutely abhorrent character. The first thing we saw him doing was having sex with his sister and pushing children out of the tower. I mean, what? And we all love him now. And that's the genius of this character. But for him to change his reality and learning how to seeking to become a better person and turning out to be perhaps one of the, if not the central hero of the whole story. And then we've got Jon in the middle of this. Jon, who wants to do the right thing, wants to protect Westeros, wants people to live, is on the side of the good and the living. And yet if his brother or his cousin, the way he sees that they're brothers, if he's on the opposing side to that, this is Jon Snow's dilemma, isn't it?
You know what's really interesting, Gemma? We always talk about the Great Other and R'hllor and gods. And whether they exist, I think yes, they exist in the characters. It's being reflected in the end of their stories. We're seeing it, and through that, it's changing the whole landscape of the world. Essentially, it's the story of birth, life, death, and then rebirth. Right? That's what Ragnarok essentially is. Even though there's that balance, that yin and yang, the dark and the light, obviously George's last book is called The Dream of Spring. After this dark period, there's hope. And in the story of Ragnarok, I believe that this Lift and Liprasir are the two children that are left over, and they basically inherit the lands and they start anew and they start this new world.
Yeah, like you said,
that's where we're headed.
This battle of the gods, we don't literally have to see R'hllor in the flesh or the Great Other in the flesh. As you said, what we've got is Bran as potentially the champion of the Great Other, and Jaime, Azor Ahai, the champion of R'hllor. Then through them, this battle of the gods will play out. In fact, it makes sense that Jaime and it makes sense that Jaime and Bran will square off at some point in the end, because it was their conflict that set this entire whole story off in motion in the first instance, wasn't it?
Very much was. The gods are working through our characters, essentially, is what I'm trying to say, everyone.
Yeah.
Now, this is something really interesting that I found, Gemma. We talked about Bran a little bit, but will the White Walkers usher in the Wind Age, and will Bran usher in the Wolf Age? We got to remember that the last book was actually called A Time for Wolves before George changed it to A Dream of Spring. And we said, does this mean Bran can be evil? Are they going to switch? The stanza kind of confirms that, no?
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is exactly where it's going. I think, and I've said this before, Bran started off this innocent, sweet boy, and he's been sucked into the darkness. I actually pulled off a quote for you relating to this particular bit. Bran's surrendering his entire life to the darkness. Bloodraven quite literally says to him at one point, "The strongest trees are rooted in the dark places of the earth. Darkness will be your cloak, your shield, your mother's milk. Darkness will make you strong." This is pretty clear where Bran has to go. This is a Sith Lord telling Bran to join the dark side. Quite literally, darkness will make you strong. If I read you out that quote again and took the bit about the tree out, darkness will be your cloak, your shield, darkness will make you strong, and then told you that a Sith Lord had said that in one of the Star Wars stories, you'd believe me.
Pretty crazy, all the different parallels that George brings into the story, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Just insane.
It's quite mind-blowing, really, isn't it? I mean, going through the research for this, and it blew my mind, going, because I was aware of the parallels. I was aware of the basic premise of the stories, and I knew there were a lot of character parallels and so on and so forth. But when I really started delving into this for the purposes of this discussion, it absolutely blew my mind. And I'm sat here wondering if I've got it all figured out now. At least that's how I'll feel for the next day or two until the next thing comes along and blows my mind again. This is the beauty of this story, isn't it?
But we actually got we actually got something really interesting that we want to read out, and it's in relation to the stanzas. Basically, there's these poems that recite what's going to happen in Ragnarok. Gemma, do you want to read it? I feel like if you read it, people will enjoy it more.
Where have you sent me it? I can't find it. Have you emailed me it?
Yeah, do you want me to read it? It's in an outline.
I think you better, because I've got too many windows open and my computer will crash.
It sates itself on the lifeblood of fated men, paints red the power's home with crimson gore, black the sun's beams in the summers that will follow. Whether's all treacherous do you seek to know, and the brothers will fight and kill each other. Sisters' children will defile kinship. It is the harsh world. Whoredom rife, an axe age, a sword age. Shields are riven, a wind age, a wolf age before the world goes headlong. No man will have mercy on another. So it's basically talking about all of this war that's going on, and that, we're going through these cyclical periods of change, basically.
When you send me the links to these poems, and they are, I mean, there's literally hundreds of them to go through. I mean, if I had the time, I would sit and pick through every single one of them. And it's mind-boggling to think that George R. R. Martin is so well read that he probably did do that. I mean, this has been his life's work, hasn't it? So maybe in the last 25 odd years, he has had the time to pick through all of these. I think essentially the crux of this is that Jaime represents Tyr, Bran represents Fenrir, and that leads us to the conclusion that Bran is going to be an antagonist, that he's going to be sort of swallowed into this world of magic and darkness. But I do tend to agree with your idea that the new god and the old gods will come to a balance, and I think that will be demonstrated in the end, that this isn't the purpose of this isn't this ultimate climactic battle between Jaime and Bran. It's what happens afterwards and the lessons that have been learned, and how do we move on from that.
This is why me and Gemma started the podcast. We are more hype or excited to talk about these subjects than probably all of you are to listen to the podcast. I just love researching all of this stuff, because I feel like, everybody's talking about the same story, but to find out these little things that we might have not thought of because of George's influence is just, I don't know, it blows my mind where how many little nuggets George has for us,
Oh, and we've got so much more Norse mythology to discuss, haven't we? This is, we got really excited when we discussed this, and we started throwing all of these ideas around, and then we came very rapidly to the conclusion that we were going to have to narrow this down. So we decided, for today, Fenrir and Tyr was going to be the primary discussion, but crikey, that there is so much more Norse mythology to cover, and we've got a lot more coming. But we'd love to hear your thoughts, as always. You know, I mean, as I've said, there's many elements I've not read, things that I've not seen yet, things I'm yet to come across in it. And if you have been privy to additional information that we've missed, or let us know, you know, have you seen something that we've not seen, something that's going to blow our minds even more? Please tell us.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, everyone. We've really enjoyed the support for the podcast so far. This is the double whammy this week. We're having so much fun, and we decided that we would do a double whammy week. Now, next week, Gemma, what are we doing next week?
Next week, I think we're going to have to pull our fingers out and really get a Q&A done, because I now have an 18-page document full of Q&As from people, because I have saved them all. I've got them from Twitter and Facebook and, of course, Patreon. So we've got a big list. And what we tend
Thanks for doing that, by the way, because, I've been super busy doing other stuff right now. Like, me and Gemma are both been super busy, by the way. Like, it's been crazy lately.
Yeah, I mean, we've been working on our websites. I've got a giveaway in progress. You know, I'm trying to get that figured out. We've got a lot to sort out. But what we tend to do with these Q&As as well is we go, right, we're going to do a Q&A session. Right, we're going to do it. We're going to get on it. And then an hour later, we've covered 3 questions. Every time. So we're going to try and plow through, and we're going to really think about our answers beforehand and make them as precise and to the point as we possibly can, with a view to getting through as many as we can, because, you know, you've taken the time to ask us. So we would like to kind of respect that with a reply.
And it's a little bit different than doing these podcast episodes, because me and Gemma do a lot of research, and we want to make sure that, we're informing you and giving you points that you're going to be interested in. It's more laid back for the Q&As too. It's a little bit easier. We can have a little bit more fun. I mean, we already have a lot of fun, as you can see. We make mistakes on the regular. Okay, it's something that we both do. We're both not perfect when we're recording and all that, but we thought this would be a really fun idea. Okay. Bonus content for patrons. That's going to be going up probably on this Saturday. I'm going to be editing this and making it nice and clean, and then basically the bonus content, Gemma. We got some really cool stuff concerning Con of Thrones and some of the future of the channels.
We've got loads of cool stuff, but we are going to zip, because we are saving that for the bonus content.
All right, where can everyone find you, Gemma?
I'm Secrets of the Citadel, quite obviously. I'm on Twitter, Citadel Secrets. I'm Gemma Stark on Facebook. I have a website now. Oh God, it's a Wix one, so I couldn't. It's 4782.
I'll put the link in the description, Gemma. I got all your social medias. Don't worry, I got it covered. So in the description of this video, you can find all of Gemma's stuff.
I've been blogging every day, just, maybe a little rant here and there, a few thoughts and updates on progress and stuff. So it'd be great to get a bit of feedback on that as well, if you get a moment.
Yeah, I'm actually the one that inspired Gemma to make the Wix website. I'm making one myself. Actually, just finished mine this morning, but I want to tweak it a little bit, and it's pretty sweet. It's fun. Actually, I put up my first blog this morning. I've yet to release it, but I will be releasing that on Twitter.
Awesome. Can't wait.
But yeah, bonus content is going to be really fun, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are really excited to be doing these. And yeah, hype is coming.
Bye.
Oh, don't laugh at my outro. Why? It's so sweet.
Fuck the king.
How much for your little fam?